When Sarah Martinez first walked into the Navy SEAL training facility carrying her chef's knife roll instead of combat gear, the silence was deafening. Here was a 28-year-old culinary school graduate who had traded her apron for military fatigues, her restaurant kitchen for the most grueling military training program on Earth. The hardened instructors exchanged glances, barely suppressing their skepticism. They had seen countless wannabe warriors wash out within the first week. But a chef? This was a first. What they didn't know was that Sarah had already survived something far more brutal than anything they could throw at her. Growing up in the rough neighborhoods of East Los Angeles, she had learned that survival meant more than just staying alive. It meant fighting for every opportunity, every meal, every chance to escape the cycle of poverty that had trapped her family for generations. Her journey from flipping burgers at a corner diner to commanding respect among America's elite warriors would challenge everything these seasoned professionals thought they knew about strength, courage, and what it really takes to earn the Navy SEAL trident. This is the story of how a woman who understood the precision of a perfect knife cut would master the art of warfare, and how her unique background would save lives in ways no one could have imagined. It's about breaking barriers, defying expectations, and proving that sometimes the most unlikely heroes emerge from the most unexpected places. Sarah's transformation from kitchen to battlefield didn't just change her life. It revolutionized how the military thinks about leadership, resilience, and the diverse talents that make a true warrior. The alarm clock screamed at 3:30 a.m., but Sarah Martinez was already awake. She had been staring at the cracked ceiling of her tiny apartment for over an hour, her mind racing with the weight of what lay ahead. In just 6 hours, she would walk into the most exclusive culinary institute in California, surrounded by students whose parents could afford the $70,000 tuition without blinking. Sarah, on the other hand, had worked 3 jobs for 2 years and taken out loans that would follow her for the next decade just to earn her spot. The journey to this moment had been anything but conventional. Born in East LA to a mother who cleaned office buildings at night and a father who had disappeared when she was 8, Sarah learned early that life didn't hand out second chances. Her neighborhood was a maze of gang territories and broken dreams, where most kids her age were more familiar with the sound of sirens than the sizzle of a well-seasoned pan. But Sarah was different. While other children played video games or hung out on street corners, she found herself drawn to the one place that seemed to make sense, the kitchen. It started when she was 9 years old. Her mother, exhausted from working double shifts, would come home too tired to cook. Sarah took it upon herself to learn, starting with simple dishes like rice and beans, gradually working her way up to more complex meals. She discovered that cooking was like solving a puzzle. Every ingredient had its place, every technique served a purpose, and when everything came together perfectly, the result was pure magic. The kitchen became her sanctuary, the one place where she felt truly in control. By the time she was 14, Sarah was working part-time at a local taqueria, earning minimum wage while learning the fundamentals of commercial cooking. The owner, an elderly Mexican woman named Rosa, took Sarah under her wing and taught her the secrets of authentic Mexican cuisine. Rosa had immigrated to America with nothing but her recipes and her determination to build a better life for her family. She saw something special in Sarah, a hunger that went beyond just wanting to cook, a drive to perfect every detail, no matter how small. Under Rosa's guidance, Sarah learned that cooking wasn't just about following recipes. It was about understanding ingredients, respecting traditions, and putting your heart into every dish. She learned to taste salt levels with just a pinch, to judge the doneness of meat by its texture, and to create flavors that could transport people back to their childhood with just one bite. More importantly, she learned that in the kitchen, your background didn't matter, only your skill, your dedication, and your willingness to keep improving. The taqueria became Sarah's second home. She would arrive before school to help with breakfast prep, work afternoons and weekends, and even volunteer her time during busy periods. Other teenagers might have resented such a demanding schedule, but Sarah thrived on it. Every burn, every cut, every 18-hour day was building something inside her, a resilience that would serve her far beyond the restaurant world. When Sarah graduated high school, she faced a choice that would define her future. She could continue working at the taqueria, eventually taking over from Rosa, and live a comfortable, if unremarkable life. Or she could take the biggest risk of her young life and pursue her dream of becoming a world-class chef. The decision should have been easy. She had already secured a place at the California Culinary Institute, one of the most prestigious cooking schools in the country. But the financial reality was overwhelming. The tuition alone was more money than her family had ever seen. Even with partial scholarships and financial aid, Sarah would need to work multiple jobs just to cover her living expenses. Her mother begged her to reconsider, terrified that her daughter would end up drowning in debt with nothing to show for it. But Sarah had already made up her mind. She had seen what was possible when talent met opportunity, and she wasn't about to let fear stop her from reaching for it. The first day at culinary school was a shock to Sarah's system. She walked into a classroom filled with students who spoke casually about their families' vacation homes in Napa Valley and their previous stages at Michelin-starred restaurants in Europe. Their knife rolls contained tools worth more than Sarah made in a month, and their confidence seemed as polished as their expensive equipment. For the first time since she had picked up a knife, Sarah felt completely out of place. But doubt was a luxury she couldn't afford. When the first practical exam arrived, preparing a classic French omelette, Sarah drew on everything Rosa had taught her about focus and precision. While her classmates struggled with the technique, Sarah's years of experience under pressure paid off. Her omelette was perfect, silky, uniform, and seasoned exactly right. The instructor, a former sous chef from a world-renowned restaurant, tasted it twice before announcing to the class that this was the standard they should all aspire to. From that moment, Sarah's reputation at school began to shift. Her classmates started to realize that beneath her quiet demeanor and thrift store chef coats was a natural talent that couldn't be bought or inherited. She approached every lesson with an intensity that bordered on obsession, staying late to practice techniques, arriving early to study recipes, and pushing herself to master skills that others took for granted. The academic workload was brutal. In addition to 12-hour days in the kitchen labs, students were expected to master culinary theory, food science, nutrition, and restaurant management. Sarah often found herself studying by candlelight when her electricity was shut off, or doing homework in the 24-hour diner where she worked nights to pay rent. Sleep became a rare luxury, and social life was non-existent. But Sarah never complained. She had learned long ago that comfort was earned, not given. Her breakthrough moment came during the school's annual competition, where students were challenged to create a 5-course tasting menu that showcased their technical skills and personal style. While other students chose elaborate presentations and expensive ingredients, Sarah went back to her roots. She created a menu that told the story of her neighborhood, elevated versions of the dishes she had grown up with, prepared with the refined techniques she had learned in school. The judges were initially skeptical when they saw street tacos and pozole on a fine dining menu, but their expressions changed with the first taste. Sarah had managed to capture the soul of traditional Mexican cuisine while demonstrating advanced culinary techniques. Her mole sauce alone contained 37 ingredients and had been simmering for 2 days. Her handmade tortillas were so perfectly executed that one judge compared them to the best he had ever tasted in Mexico City. When the results were announced, Sarah's menu had earned the highest score in the competition's history. But more than the recognition, she had proven something to herself, that her background wasn't a disadvantage to overcome, but a unique perspective that could set her apart in a crowded field. The victory opened doors that Sarah had never imagined possible. Multiple restaurants offered her staging opportunities, culinary magazines wanted to feature her story, and established chefs began reaching out with job offers. For someone who had grown up wondering where her next meal would come from, the sudden abundance of opportunities was overwhelming. She ultimately chose to stage at Luna, a small but highly respected restaurant known for its innovative approach to Latin American cuisine. The head chef, Marcus Rivera, was himself a product of humble beginnings who had worked his way up from dishwasher to James Beard Award winner. He saw in Sarah the same hunger that had driven his own success, and was determined to help her reach her full potential. Working at Luna was like attending an advanced masterclass in professional cooking. The pace was relentless, the standards impossibly high, and the pressure constant. Sarah found herself working alongside cooks who had trained in the finest restaurants around the world, each one bringing their own expertise and expecting nothing less than perfection from their colleagues. Once again, she was the outsider, but this time she was ready for the challenge. Her position as a line cook meant mastering multiple stations, memorizing dozens of recipes, and executing hundreds of plates each night with absolute consistency. A single overcooked piece of fish or underseasoned sauce could derail an entire service, and in the high-pressure environment of a professional kitchen, mistakes were not tolerated. Sarah threw herself into the work with the same intensity that had carried her through school, arriving early to practice, staying late to clean, and studying every aspect of the restaurant's operations. But it was her leadership qualities that truly set her apart. In a kitchen full of egos and intense personalities, Sarah had a rare ability to remain calm under pressure and help her teammates perform at their best. When a new cook was struggling with the soup station, Sarah would quietly step in to help without making them feel inadequate. When the restaurant faced its busiest night of the year, Sarah organized the prep work so efficiently that service ran smoother than anyone expected. Marcus noticed these qualities and began giving Sarah increasing responsibilities. She was promoted from line cook to sous chef in record time, making her one of the youngest people ever to hold that position at the restaurant. Her success seemed unstoppable, and everyone assumed she would continue climbing the traditional ladder of the culinary world, perhaps opening her own restaurant or earning her own James Beard nomination. But Sarah had other plans brewing in her mind, plans that no one could have anticipated. Late at night, after service was finished and the kitchen was cleaned, she found herself reading military history and watching documentaries about special forces operations. Something about the precision, the teamwork, and the high-stakes decision-making resonated with skills she had developed in professional kitchens. The idea that seemed impossible was slowly taking shape. What if she could apply everything she had learned about leadership under pressure to serve her country in a completely different way? When Sarah finally announced her intention to leave Luna and enlist in the Navy, the reaction was swift and almost universally negative. Marcus was devastated. Her colleagues thought she was throwing away a promising career, and her mother couldn't understand why her daughter would give up everything she had worked so hard to achieve. But Sarah had already made her decision. She had conquered the culinary world, but now she wanted to test herself in an entirely different arena, one where the stakes were life and death, and where her unique combination of skills might serve a greater purpose than creating memorable meals. The Navy recruitment office in downtown Los Angeles was nothing like Sarah had imagined. Instead of the sterile, intimidating environment she expected, it felt more like a small business office with motivational posters and fluorescent lighting that hummed slightly too loud. Petty Officer Rodriguez, a compact man with kind eyes and calloused hands, looked up from his paperwork when Sarah walked in. He had seen plenty of people come through these doors with dreams of military glory, but something about this young woman seemed different. Sarah had dressed carefully for this meeting, choosing a simple button-down shirt and slacks that she hoped struck the right balance between professional and approachable. In her backpack, she carried copies of her culinary school transcripts, letters of recommendation from Marcus and her professors, and a portfolio of photographs from her most successful dishes. She wasn't entirely sure why she had brought the portfolio. It seemed unlikely that the Navy would care about her beef Wellington presentation, but she wanted to be prepared for any questions about her background. Petty Officer Rodriguez listened carefully as Sarah explained her intentions. She wanted to join the Navy, she said, and eventually try out for the SEALs. The officer's expression didn't change, but Sarah caught the brief pause before he responded. In 15 years of recruiting, he had met exactly 0 women who expressed interest in SEAL training, mainly because it hadn't been an option until very recently. The military had only begun allowing women to compete for special operations roles in 2016, and the cultural shift was still very much a work in progress. The conversation that followed was unlike any job interview Sarah had ever experienced. Rodriguez asked about her physical fitness, her swimming ability, her tolerance for stress, and sleep deprivation. When she mentioned her culinary background, his questions became more specific and probing. Could she work effectively in high-pressure team environments? How did she handle criticism and failure? Had she ever been in situations where people's safety depended on her performance? Sarah found herself describing the controlled chaos of a restaurant kitchen during peak service, the split-second timing, the absolute need for clear communication, the way a single person's mistake could cascade into disaster for the entire team. She talked about the physical demands of standing for 14 hours straight, the mental focus required to juggle multiple complex tasks simultaneously, and the thick skin needed to survive in an industry known for its harsh criticism and unforgiving standards. As she spoke, Rodriguez began to understand that this wasn't some impulsive decision driven by romantic notions of military heroism. Sarah had already proven herself in an environment that shared many characteristics with special operations, intense pressure, demanding standards, and the need for both individual excellence and seamless teamwork. Her culinary career had been, in many ways, an inadvertent preparation for military service. The physical requirements alone would be challenging for anyone, but Rodriguez was particularly concerned about the swimming standards. Navy SEAL training involved extensive water work, including underwater demolition exercises and long-distance ocean swims in full gear. Sarah admitted that while she could swim, she had never been particularly strong in the water. Growing up in East LA, she had learned to swim at the local community center, but her experience was limited to basic strokes and occasional recreational swimming. Rodriguez was honest about the odds she would face. Even male candidates with extensive military backgrounds and peak physical conditioning had failure rates approaching 80%. For a woman with no prior military experience, the challenges would be exponentially greater. But he also recognized something in Sarah's demeanor that reminded him of the most successful recruits he had worked with over the years, a quiet confidence that suggested she understood exactly what she was getting into. The paperwork alone took 3 hours to complete. Medical history, educational background, family information, financial records. The Navy wanted to know everything about potential recruits before making any commitments. Sarah answered each question honestly, including details about her family's financial struggles and her own student loan debt. She had expected the process to be invasive, but the reality was even more thorough than she had anticipated. When the initial interview was complete, Rodriguez outlined the next steps. Sarah would need to pass a physical fitness test, complete additional medical examinations, and undergo an extensive background investigation. Assuming she cleared all those hurdles, she would be eligible for basic Navy training, followed by additional screening for special operations programs. The entire process could take months, and there were no guarantees at any stage. Sarah left the recruitment office with a stack of preparation materials and a training schedule that would consume the next 6 months of her life. The physical fitness standards were daunting. She would need to swim 500 meters in under 12 minutes and 30 seconds, complete 50 push-ups and 50 sit-ups in under 2 minutes each, and run 1.5 miles in under 10 minutes and 30 seconds. For someone whose idea of cardio had been running between kitchen stations, these requirements represented a complete transformation of her physical capabilities. The decision to leave Luna was one of the most difficult conversations Sarah had ever had. Marcus had invested enormous time and energy in developing her skills, and her departure would leave a significant gap in the restaurant's operations. He listened silently as she explained her plans, his expressions cycling through disbelief, disappointment, and, finally, a grudging respect. He had always known that Sarah was destined for something bigger than even the most successful restaurant career, but he had assumed that something would be in the culinary world. Sarah's last night at Luna was bittersweet. Her colleagues organized a farewell dinner, preparing a feast that showcased the dishes she had helped develop during her time there. The meal was a celebration of everything they had accomplished together, but also a recognition that they were losing someone special. Several of the other cooks admitted they thought she was crazy, but they also acknowledged her courage in pursuing such an unconventional path. The physical training began the next morning at 5 a.m. with a run around her neighborhood. Sarah had always been in decent shape. Restaurant work required stamina and strength, but she quickly discovered that her fitness level was nowhere near what would be required for military training. The first run left her gasping and dizzy, barely able to complete 2 miles at a pace that would need to improve dramatically over the coming months. Swimming proved to be an even greater challenge. The community pool where she had learned as a child suddenly felt vast and intimidating when she was trying to complete timed laps in specific strokes. Her technique was sloppy, her endurance was poor, and her times were embarrassingly slow. After her first official practice session, Sarah sat in her car in the parking lot and seriously questioned whether she had made a terrible mistake. But quitting had never been an option for Sarah, and she wasn't about to start now. She hired a former Navy swimmer to coach her 3 times a week, studying technique videos online and practicing in any body of water she could find. Her hands became raw from chlorine exposure, her shoulders ached constantly, and she went to bed each night exhausted from the physical demands of her new routine. The transformation wasn't just physical, it was mental and emotional as well. Sarah had to learn to push through discomfort in ways she never had before, to continue performing when her body was screaming for rest. She discovered reserves of determination she didn't know existed, and began to understand why military training was designed to break people down before building them back up. Her civilian life became increasingly focused and sparse. Social activities disappeared entirely, replaced by training sessions and study time. She read everything she could find about military history, special operations tactics, and the psychological aspects of elite performance. Her small apartment became filled with military manuals, fitness equipment, and nutritional supplements designed to support intense training. The financial pressure was enormous. Without her restaurant income, Sarah was living on savings that dwindled rapidly. She took on occasional catering jobs to supplement her funds, but these became increasingly rare as her training schedule intensified. Some days, she survived on protein bars and instant noodles, telling herself that learning to function on minimal resources would serve her well in military training. 6 months later, Sarah returned to the recruitment office for her final pre-enlistment evaluation. The physical transformation was remarkable. She had lost 15 pounds of fat and gained 10 pounds of muscle. Her cardiovascular endurance had improved dramatically, and her swimming times now met the minimum requirements. But the mental change was even more significant. The confident young chef who had first walked into the office had been replaced by someone harder, more focused, and absolutely certain of her decision. Petty Officer Rodriguez was impressed, but not surprised. In their regular check-ins over the previous months, he had watched Sarah attack each challenge with the same methodical determination she had once applied to mastering knife techniques. She had approached military preparation like a complex recipe, breaking down each component, practicing until it became automatic, and gradually building toward a finished product that met the highest standards. The final hurdle was the background investigation, a process that involved interviews with family members, former employers, teachers, and neighbors. Investigators wanted to verify every detail of Sarah's life, looking for any red flags that might indicate security risks or character issues. The process was invasive and time-consuming, but Sarah had nothing to hide. Her record showed consistent hard work, integrity under pressure, and the kind of leadership potential the military valued. When the clearance came through, Sarah had less than 2 weeks before reporting to boot camp. She spent the time settling her affairs, saying goodbye to family and friends, and mentally preparing for the next phase of her journey. Her mother was still struggling to understand her daughter's decision, but she had begun to see the determination that drove it. Rosa from the taqueria was proud, but worried, making Sarah promise to stay in touch and come back safely. The night before leaving for boot camp, Sarah stood in her empty apartment and reflected on how much her life had changed in just 2 years. She had gone from being a rising star in the culinary world to a complete unknown in the military realm. Everything she had worked for in the first part of her adult life was now behind her, and everything ahead was uncertain. But she felt more confident about her path than she ever had before. The bus ride to the Naval Training Center in Great Lakes, Illinois, was filled with young people from backgrounds as diverse as America itself. Some were fresh out of high school with no clear direction in life. Others were college graduates looking for adventure and purpose. A few, like Sarah, were making dramatic career changes that had surprised everyone who knew them. But, regardless of their backgrounds, they all shared one common characteristic. They had volunteered to serve their country in ways that would test every aspect of their character. As the bus pulled through the gates of the training facility, Sarah caught her first glimpse of the place where she would spend the next 8 weeks. The buildings were utilitarian and imposing, designed to strip away civilian comfort and replace it with military discipline. She felt a familiar flutter of nervousness in her stomach, the same feeling she had experienced on her first day at culinary school. But underneath the anxiety was excitement and anticipation. She was finally about to discover whether her unconventional preparation had equipped her for the challenges ahead. The first shock of boot camp wasn't the shouting or the early morning wake-up calls. Sarah had expected those. It was the complete erasure of individual identity that caught her off guard. Within 30 minutes of arriving at the Naval Training Center, her civilian clothes were packed away, her hair was cut to regulation length, and she was wearing the same uniform as everyone else. The woman who had built her reputation on creativity and personal flair suddenly became Recruit Martinez, indistinguishable from the other 79 members of her training division. Chief Petty Officer Williams was their lead instructor, a 20-year veteran whose weathered face and precise movements spoke of countless hours spent molding civilians into sailors. He had trained thousands of recruits over his career, and he could usually size up a new group within the first few days. But Recruit Martinez puzzled him. While other recruits struggled with the transition from civilian to military life, she seemed to adapt with unusual ease to the structured environment and intense scrutiny. The daily routine at boot camp was designed to be overwhelming. Recruits were awakened at 5 a.m. for physical training, followed by inspections, classes, more physical training, meals eaten in precisely timed intervals, and lights out at 9 p.m. Every aspect of their lives was scheduled and supervised, from how they made their beds to how they stood in formation. For many recruits, this level of control was suffocating and alien. For Sarah, it felt remarkably similar to the organized chaos of a professional kitchen. Physical training proved to be Sarah's strongest area. The months of preparation had paid off dramatically. Her push-ups, sit-ups, and running times all exceeded the minimum requirements, and her swimming had improved to the point where she was among the top performers in her division. But, more importantly, she demonstrated the kind of mental toughness that instructors looked for in potential leaders. When other recruits were gasping and ready to quit during conditioning exercises, Sarah maintained her pace and often encouraged struggling teammates to keep going. The academic components of boot camp were equally demanding. Recruits studied naval history, military protocol, weapons handling, first aid, and dozens of other subjects that would form the foundation of their military knowledge. Sarah approached these studies with the same systematic thoroughness she had once applied to learning knife techniques and sauce preparations. She took detailed notes, studied late into the night, and consistently scored in the top 10% of her class on examinations. But it was during the practical exercises that Sarah's unique background began to distinguish her from her peers. When the division faced their first major inspection, Sarah applied organizational principles she had learned from restaurant management to coordinate her squad's preparation. She broke down the complex inspection requirements into manageable tasks, assigned specific responsibilities to each team member based on their strengths, and established quality control checkpoints to ensure everything met standards. The result was the highest inspection score their company commander had seen in over a year. The leadership potential that instructors noticed in Sarah didn't go unnoticed by her fellow recruits either. Despite the Navy's official policy of treating all recruits equally, natural hierarchies always emerged within training groups. Some people were natural followers, others were disruptive influences, and a select few demonstrated the qualities that made others want to follow their lead. Sarah fell clearly into the latter category, even though she made no obvious effort to seek authority or attention. Week 3 brought the first major challenge that would test not just physical capabilities, but mental resilience as well. The division was taken to a pool facility for water survival training, where they would need to demonstrate their ability to stay afloat while wearing full military gear, perform rescue techniques, and complete timed swimming exercises under stressful conditions. For many recruits, this was their first real encounter with the possibility of failure and elimination from the program. Sarah watched as several of her squad mates struggled with the water exercises. One recruit, a young man from Arizona who had never learned to swim properly, was clearly in danger of washing out. The instructors were evaluating not just individual performance, but also how recruits supported their teammates under pressure. Sarah made a quick decision that would have significant consequences for both her and her struggling teammate. During a break in the formal exercises, Sarah approached the struggling swimmer and offered to help him practice the required techniques. Using skills she had developed from her own recent swimming training, she broke down the complex movements into smaller, manageable components and worked with him until he could perform them consistently. When the final evaluation came, he passed by the narrowest of margins, but he passed. The instructors noted Sarah's spontaneous mentoring effort, marking it as evidence of the kind of leadership instincts they were looking for. The incident established Sarah's reputation within the division as someone who could be counted on when things got difficult. Word spread that recruit Martinez not only excelled in her own performance, but actively helped others succeed as well. This reputation would prove crucial when the division faced its next major test, a simulated combat exercise designed to evaluate their ability to work as a cohesive unit under extreme stress. The exercise took place during week 5, when recruits were exhausted from the constant pressure and many were beginning to show signs of physical and emotional strain. They were awakened at 2 a.m. and told they had 15 minutes to gear up for an emergency scenario. Half asleep and disoriented, the division was transported to a training facility where they would face a series of challenges designed to simulate the confusion and pressure of actual military operations. The scenario involved a mock ship emergency where recruits had to evacuate wounded personnel, fight simulated fires, and maintain communications while under attack. The exercise was designed to be deliberately chaotic and overwhelming, with instructors shouting contradictory orders, simulated explosions, and environmental hazards that made simple tasks extremely difficult. Many divisions fell apart during this exercise, with recruits either freezing up under pressure or becoming so focused on individual survival that they forgot about teamwork entirely. Sarah found herself naturally taking charge of her squad during the chaos. Her experience managing multiple crises simultaneously in restaurant kitchens served her well. She could assess multiple problems at once, prioritize actions based on urgency and available resources, and communicate clearly even when adrenaline was surging through her system. When her squad's designated leader became overwhelmed and stopped giving coherent orders, Sarah seamlessly stepped into the role without creating conflict or confusion among her teammates. The exercise culminated with a rescue scenario where squads had to work together to evacuate casualties from a smoke-filled compartment. The environment was genuinely dangerous. Thick smoke reduced visibility to near zero, the temperature was uncomfortably hot, and the physical demands of carrying wounded personnel in full gear pushed everyone to their limits. Several recruits panicked or became disoriented, but Sarah's squad performed flawlessly under her improvised leadership. Chief Williams observed the entire exercise from a position where he could monitor multiple squads simultaneously. He had seen thousands of recruits go through this particular test, and he knew which behaviors indicated natural leadership potential versus those who simply followed orders well. Sarah's performance was remarkable not just for its competence, but for the way she managed to inspire confidence in her teammates even when the situation seemed hopeless. The feedback session after the exercise was typically brutal. Instructors critiqued every mistake, highlighted missed opportunities, and made it clear that the performance had fallen short of real-world standards. But they also identified recruits who had demonstrated exceptional potential under pressure. Sarah was singled out for her leadership during the crisis, her ability to adapt to changing circumstances, and her commitment to ensuring that every member of her team succeeded. Week 6 introduced weapons training, an area where Sarah's lack of prior military experience became apparent. While some recruits had grown up hunting or had previous firearms experience, Sarah had never handled weapons of any kind. The technical aspects of weapon operation, maintenance, and safety protocols were completely foreign to her. For the first time since arriving at boot camp, she found herself struggling to keep up with her peers. But Sarah approached weapons training with the same methodical determination she had applied to learning complex cooking techniques. She studied the manuals until she could recite maintenance procedures from memory, practiced assembly and disassembly until her muscle memory was flawless, and spent extra time at the range working on marksmanship fundamentals. Her progress was slower than some, but it was steady and consistent. The weapons qualification test was scheduled for week 7, and failure meant potential elimination from the program. Sarah spent the week before the test practicing every spare moment she had, often staying at the range until the instructors forced her to leave. Her scores gradually improved, but she was still barely meeting the minimum standards required for passing. On the day of the qualification test, Sarah's squad was among the last groups to shoot. She had spent the morning watching other recruits complete their tests, noting their techniques, and mentally rehearsing her own performance. When her turn finally came, she approached the firing line with the same focused concentration she had once brought to preparing a perfect sauce during a busy dinner service. The test consisted of multiple firing positions and distances, each designed to evaluate different aspects of marksmanship skill. Sarah's first few shots were slightly off target, but she quickly adjusted her technique based on the feedback from her hits. Her years of developing precise hand-eye coordination in the kitchen served her well. She understood how to make small, incremental adjustments until her performance met the required standards. When the scoring was completed, Sarah had passed the qualification test with just 3 points above the minimum required score. It wasn't an impressive margin, but it was enough. More importantly, her instructors had observed the same qualities during weapons training that they had noted in other areas: persistence, methodical improvement, and the ability to perform under pressure when the stakes were highest. The final week of boot camp was traditionally focused on preparing recruits for graduation and their transition to specialized training programs. For most recruits, this meant assignment to various technical schools where they would learn the specific skills required for their chosen military careers. But For a select few who had demonstrated exceptional leadership potential during boot camp, there were opportunities to apply for more demanding programs that would test their limits in entirely new ways. Chief Williams called Sarah into his office during the final week for what she assumed would be a routine exit interview. Instead, she found herself facing a conversation that would determine the next phase of her military career. Williams explained that her performance during boot camp had been exceptional, particularly her leadership abilities and performance under stress. Based on his observations and recommendations from other instructors, she was being invited to apply for advanced training programs that were typically reserved for the most promising recruits. The conversation was both thrilling and terrifying for Sarah. She had hoped to distinguish herself during boot camp, but the reality of actually qualifying for elite programs was overwhelming. Williams explained that the next level of training would make boot camp seem easy in comparison. The physical demands would be exponentially greater, the mental stress would be constant, and the failure rates were extraordinarily high. He wanted to make sure she understood exactly what she would be getting into before making any commitments. Sarah listened carefully to Williams' description of the challenges ahead, but her decision had already been made. She had not come this far to settle for ordinary military service. Everything she had accomplished in her life had been the result of pushing beyond what others thought was possible for someone with her background. The opportunity to test herself against the highest standards the military had to offer was exactly what she had been seeking when she first walked into the recruitment office 2 years earlier. Graduation from boot camp was both an ending and a beginning. Sarah stood with her division as they received their first military assignment orders, officially transformed from civilians into sailors. The ceremony was emotional for everyone involved. 8 weeks of intense shared experience had created bonds that would last lifetimes. But even as she celebrated this achievement with her teammates, Sarah's mind was already focused on the challenges ahead. In just 2 weeks, she would report to a new training facility where she would discover whether her unconventional preparation and natural abilities were enough to succeed at the highest levels of military service. The Naval Special Warfare Preparatory School in Great Lakes, Illinois, was designed to break people. Sarah discovered this within her first hour of arrival, when she and 23 other candidates were subjected to a fitness evaluation that would have challenged Olympic athletes. The instructors, all former SEALs themselves, made it clear from the beginning that most of the people standing in front of them would not make it through the 6-month program. Their job was to identify the small percentage who possessed the rare combination of physical capability, mental toughness, and character required for special operations. Master Chief Peterson, the lead instructor, was a legend even among SEALs. He had served in every major conflict of the past 2 decades, earned more decorations than most people could name, and had personally trained hundreds of special operators. When he looked at the incoming class, his expression revealed nothing about his thoughts regarding the single woman among them. Sarah had expected hostility, skepticism, or at least curiosity about her presence, but Peterson treated her with the same professional indifference he showed all candidates. The first week was devoted to baseline assessments that would determine each candidate's starting point and track their progress throughout the program. The physical standards were staggering. Candidates needed to swim 500 meters in under 8 minutes, complete 100 push-ups and 100 sit-ups in under 5 minutes each, and run 4 miles in under 28 minutes. These were just the minimum requirements to avoid immediate elimination. The actual training would demand performance levels far beyond these baselines. Sarah's months of preparation had brought her to the minimum standards, but just barely. Several male candidates who had been college athletes or had previous military experience were significantly stronger and faster than she was. For the first time since beginning her military journey, Sarah faced the possibility that hard work and determination might not be enough to overcome the physical advantages her competitors possessed. But the instructors were evaluating more than just raw physical capability. They watched how candidates responded to failure, how they treated teammates who were struggling, and whether they could maintain composure when pushed beyond their comfort zones. The first major elimination came during the second week, when 3 candidates were dismissed not for failing physical tests, but for displaying attitudes and behaviors that made them unsuitable for special operations regardless of their physical abilities. The academic component of the preparatory program was as demanding as the physical training. Candidates studied advanced combat tactics, intelligence-gathering techniques, foreign languages, and the complex geopolitical situations where special operations forces typically operated. Sarah found herself drawing on skills she had developed during culinary school, where she had learned to absorb large amounts of technical information quickly and apply it under pressure. Swimming training was conducted in conditions designed to simulate the worst possible scenarios special operators might face. Candidates performed underwater exercises while wearing full combat gear, practiced rescue techniques in rough water, and learned to navigate using only compass bearings while swimming in complete darkness. Sarah's improved swimming ability served her well, but these exercises pushed everyone to their absolute limits. The first major test came during week 4, when candidates were required to complete a series of ocean swims off the coast of California. The water was cold enough to cause hypothermia, the currents were treacherous, and the distance requirements increased each day. Several candidates, including some who had been top performers in pool-based exercises, discovered that open water swimming in combat conditions was an entirely different challenge. Sarah approached these swims with the same analytical mindset she had once applied to perfecting complex recipes. She studied tide charts and weather patterns, learned to read water conditions, and developed strategies for conserving energy during long-distance swims. When other candidates were struggling with the mental challenge of swimming in dark, cold water with no visible landmarks, Sarah used meditation techniques she had learned during her culinary training to maintain focus and control her breathing. The elimination rate was brutal. By week 6, only 14 of the original 24 candidates remained in the program. The reasons for departure varied. Some candidates were injured and medically disqualified, others failed to meet progressively higher fitness standards, and a few simply decided that special operations were not for them. Each elimination served as a reminder to the remaining candidates of how thin the margin for error had become. Sarah survived this initial winnowing process, but she was acutely aware that she was consistently among the bottom performers in most physical categories. Her running times, strength measurements, and swimming speeds were adequate, but not impressive. Several instructors had private conversations with her about whether she was truly prepared for the even greater challenges that lay ahead in actual SEAL training. Week 8 introduced combat training exercises that combined physical exertion with tactical decision-making under extreme stress. Candidates were required to complete obstacle courses while carrying wounded teammates, navigate through simulated enemy territory, and make life-or-death decisions with incomplete information and time pressure that made deliberation impossible. These exercises were designed to identify candidates who could maintain their judgment and leadership abilities even when their bodies were pushed to the point of exhaustion. Sarah's background in restaurant management proved unexpectedly valuable during these complex exercises. She had spent years making rapid decisions in chaotic environments, coordinating teams under pressure, and maintaining quality standards even when every system seemed to be failing at once. The tactical situations were completely different from anything she had experienced in civilian life, but the mental processes required for success were remarkably similar. During one particularly challenging exercise, Sarah's team was tasked with rescuing hostages from a fortified position while under simulated enemy fire. The scenario was designed to be nearly impossible. There were too many variables, too little time, and insufficient resources to guarantee success using conventional approaches. Most teams that attempted this exercise failed despite having physically superior candidates and more extensive military backgrounds. Sarah's team was struggling with the same problems that had defeated previous groups when she recognized a pattern in the exercise design that reminded her of managing multiple dinner services simultaneously in a restaurant. Just as she had learned to prioritize tasks based on urgency and available resources in the kitchen, she began organizing the rescue mission using similar principles. Instead of trying to address every challenge at once, she broke the mission into sequential phases, assigned specific responsibilities to teammates based on their individual strengths, and established clear communication protocols that prevented confusion during the operation. The strategy worked. Sarah's team completed the exercise successfully, earning praise from instructors who had watched dozens of previous attempts end in failure. More importantly, the other candidates began to recognize that Sarah brought unique problem-solving abilities that complemented the conventional military training most of them had received. Week 10 brought the first formal leadership evaluation, where each candidate was required to take charge of increasingly complex operations while being assessed by multiple instructors. The exercises were designed to reveal how candidates performed when they were personally responsible for the success or failure of an entire mission, including the safety of their teammates. This was often where candidates with impressive individual capabilities revealed fundamental weaknesses in judgment or character that made them unsuitable for special operations leadership roles. Sarah's first leadership exercise involved planning and executing a reconnaissance mission in hostile territory. She was given a specific objective, limited resources, and a team of 4 other candidates who would be evaluating her performance as critically as the instructors. The mission required stealth, precise timing, and the ability to adapt quickly when unexpected complications arose, which they inevitably did. The exercise began before dawn with a movement phase that required Sarah's team to cover several miles of rough terrain without being detected by opposing forces played by other candidates and instructors. Sarah's approach to this phase reflected lessons she had learned about planning and preparation during her culinary career. She spent hours studying maps and intelligence reports, developed multiple contingency plans for likely complications, and briefed her team thoroughly on both the primary mission and potential alternatives. When the exercise began, Sarah's thorough preparation paid immediate dividends. Her team moved efficiently through the terrain, avoided detection by opposing forces, and reached their observation position ahead of schedule. But the real test came when they discovered that the target area had changed significantly since their intelligence reports were prepared. The mission could still be accomplished, but it would require improvisation and real-time decision-making under pressure. Sarah made the critical decision to modify their approach based on the new information rather than rigidly following the original plan. She repositioned her team to take advantage of changed conditions, adjusted their timeline to account for new variables, and maintained constant communication to ensure everyone understood the evolving situation. When opposing forces unexpectedly moved closer to their position, she made the difficult choice to abort the reconnaissance phase early rather than risk detection, demonstrating the kind of tactical judgment that instructors were evaluating. The post-exercise debrief was typically intensive, with instructors critiquing every decision and exploring alternative approaches that might have yielded better results. But Sarah's performance earned rare praise for her adaptability, thorough preparation, and willingness to prioritize mission success over personal achievement. The exercise established her reputation among both candidates and instructors as someone who could be trusted with genuine leadership responsibility. Week 12 brought the final major hurdle before candidates would be eligible to attempt actual SEAL training, the culminating exercise known as Hell Week preparation. This was a scaled-down version of the legendary Hell Week that formed the climax of basic SEAL training, designed to give preparatory school candidates a realistic preview of what awaited them if they continued in the program. The exercise lasted 5 days and involved almost continuous physical and mental challenges with minimal sleep and constant pressure from instructors. Candidates were required to complete obstacle courses, long-distance swims, tactical exercises, and problem-solving challenges while operating on fewer than 4 hours of sleep per day. The physical exhaustion was severe, but the mental stress was even more challenging. Candidates had to maintain their decision-making abilities and teamwork even when their bodies were screaming for rest. Sarah entered this exercise knowing that it would be the ultimate test of everything she had learned and developed over the past year. Her physical conditioning was now at its peak, but more importantly, she had developed the mental resilience and leadership skills that would be crucial for surviving the psychological pressure of the exercise. She had learned to push through discomfort that would have stopped her cold just months earlier, and she understood how to maintain focus even when exhaustion made clear thinking nearly impossible. The first day of the exercise was a brutal introduction to the sustained pressure that would define the entire week. Candidates were awakened at 3 a.m. for a 10-mile run in full gear, followed by swimming exercises, obstacle courses, and tactical scenarios that continued until well past midnight. By the time they were allowed a few hours of rest, everyone was already operating in a state of severe fatigue that would only get worse as the week progressed. Sarah's strategy for surviving the exercise was based on principles she had learned during her most demanding restaurant shifts: pace herself for the long term, maintain situational awareness despite exhaustion, and focus on helping the team succeed rather than just individual survival. She had learned that pushing too hard early in a long, demanding period often led to complete breakdown later, so she focused on steady, consistent performance rather than trying to dominate every individual challenge. By day 3, the field of candidates had been reduced by attrition to just 8 people. Some had been eliminated for failing to meet performance standards, others had been injured, and A few had voluntarily withdrawn when they realized they couldn't maintain the required level of performance. Sarah was still among the survivors, though she was clearly operating at her absolute limits both physically and mentally. The final day of the exercise brought the most challenging test of all, a complex mission that required all remaining candidates to work together as a cohesive unit while individual instructors tried to break their morale and coordination. The mission involved multiple phases including infiltration, reconnaissance, rescue operations, and extraction, all while being constantly harassed by instructors who were trying to create the kind of confusion and pressure that characterized real combat operations. Sarah found herself naturally taking on a coordination role during this final exercise, using her organizational skills to keep track of multiple mission components while maintaining communication between different elements of the operation. When other candidates were becoming overwhelmed by the complexity and pressure, she helped break down the overall mission into manageable tasks and ensured that everyone understood their specific responsibilities. The exercise concluded at dawn on the 5th day with a final physical challenge that pushed everyone beyond what they thought was possible. Candidates who had survived the entire week were required to complete a series of swimming and running exercises that would have been difficult when they were fresh and rested. In their current state of exhaustion, the challenges seemed nearly impossible. But Sarah had learned that impossible was often just a starting point for discovering what was actually achievable with enough determination and proper technique. When the final scores were announced, Sarah had not only survived the preparatory program, but had earned the highest overall rating among all candidates. Her combination of leadership ability, tactical judgment, and resilience under extreme pressure had impressed instructors who had initially been skeptical about her unconventional background. More importantly, she had earned the respect of her fellow candidates, who had seen firsthand that her success was based on genuine capability rather than lowered standards or special treatment. Master Chief Peterson's final evaluation was characteristically brief, but significant. Sarah had demonstrated, he wrote, the rare combination of physical capability, mental toughness, and leadership potential that special operations required. She was, in his professional judgment, ready to attempt the ultimate challenge, basic underwater demolition/SEAL training, where she would discover whether her remarkable journey from restaurant kitchens to military excellence could carry her all the way to earning the Navy SEAL Trident. The Naval Amphibious Base Coronado in San Diego looked deceptively peaceful in the early morning light, with its pristine beaches and calm Pacific waters creating an almost resort-like atmosphere. But Sarah knew that this serene setting was home to the most grueling military training program in the world. As she walked through the gates for the first day of basic underwater demolition/SEAL training, she carried with her the knowledge that fewer than 1 in 4 candidates would earn the right to call themselves Navy SEALs. Class 342 consisted of 157 candidates from diverse backgrounds, former college athletes, military veterans from other branches, and a few exceptional individuals like Sarah who had taken unconventional paths to this moment. The instructors made no special acknowledgement of the historic nature of having a woman in the class. Sarah would be held to exactly the same standards as every other candidate, with no modifications or accommodations of any kind. Senior Chief Martinez, the lead instructor for Class 342, was a legendary figure even within the SEAL community. He had completed more than a dozen combat deployments, earned every decoration the Navy could bestow, and had personally trained over 2,000 SEALs during his career. When he addressed the class on their first morning, his message was characteristically direct. Most of them would quit before the training was complete, and those who remained would be tested in ways that revealed the absolute truth about their character and capabilities. The first phase of training, lasting 8 weeks, focused on physical conditioning and the basic skills that formed the foundation of special operations capability. Candidates were required to meet progressively higher fitness standards each week, master complex swimming and diving techniques, and complete obstacle courses that demanded both individual excellence and seamless teamwork. The daily schedule was punishing. Training began before dawn and continued until late evening, with minimal time for rest or recovery. Sarah's performance during the initial weeks was solid but not spectacular. Her running times and strength measurements placed her in the middle of the class rankings, while her swimming scores were among the top 10. But the instructors were evaluating more than just physical capabilities. They watched how candidates responded to stress, how they treated teammates who were struggling, and whether they maintained their composure when facing seemingly impossible challenges. The first major test came during week 3, when candidates were required to complete the infamous obstacle course known as the O course within a specific time limit. The course consisted of a dozen obstacles that tested every aspect of physical fitness and mental determination. Failure to complete the course within the time limit meant immediate dismissal from the program, with no opportunity for retesting or remedial training. Sarah had practiced individual elements of the obstacle course during her preparatory training, but the full course was more demanding than anything she had experienced. The rope climb at the end required upper body strength that pushed her to her absolute limits, and she completed the course with less than 30 seconds to spare. Several candidates who had seemed strong during earlier training failed this test, providing a stark reminder that SEAL training eliminated people for any weakness, regardless of their strengths in other areas. Week 5 brought water competency testing that would determine which candidates possessed the swimming and diving skills necessary for underwater operations. The tests included treading water for extended periods while wearing full gear, completing underwater obstacle courses, and demonstrating rescue techniques that could mean the difference between life and death in actual combat situations. These exercises were conducted in both pool and open ocean environments, with conditions that deliberately created maximum stress and disorientation. Sarah's months of intensive swimming preparation proved crucial during this phase. While some candidates who had been stronger runners or better at land-based obstacles struggled with the water requirements, she moved through the swimming tests with confidence and precision. Her performance during underwater navigation exercises was particularly impressive. She demonstrated an almost intuitive ability to maintain direction and control her breathing even in challenging conditions. But the real test of water competency came during the surf passage exercises, where candidates were required to navigate small boats through heavy surf conditions that could easily result in serious injury or death if proper techniques weren't followed precisely. These exercises were conducted during winter months when water temperatures were at their lowest and wave conditions were most dangerous. Several candidates were eliminated during surf passage training, either because they couldn't master the required techniques or because they were injured during the inevitably violent encounters with the Pacific surf. Sarah's first surf passage was a terrifying introduction to the raw power of the ocean. Despite extensive preparation and instruction, nothing had quite prepared her for the reality of fighting through 12-foot waves while trying to coordinate with a team of other candidates who were equally overwhelmed by the conditions. The boat capsized repeatedly, throwing candidates into churning water that was cold enough to cause hypothermia within minutes. But Sarah's restaurant experience had taught her how to function effectively as part of a team, even when individual performance was suffering. She focused on communication and coordination rather than trying to be the strongest individual performer, helping her team develop the rhythm and timing necessary for successful surf passage. Her boat crew became one of the most reliable units in the class, completing their passages consistently despite the challenging conditions. Week 7 marked the beginning of Hell Week, the legendary 5 a half-day exercise that formed the climax of the first phase of SEAL training. During Hell Week, candidates would be pushed to their absolute limits through continuous physical and mental challenges, with a total of fewer than 4 hours of sleep over the entire period. The week was designed not just to test physical capabilities, but to reveal who possessed the mental toughness necessary for special operations when their bodies were pushed beyond normal human endurance. Hell Week began on Sunday evening with a simulated attack on the candidate barracks, complete with explosions, machine gun fire, and instructors screaming orders in the chaos. Candidates had minutes to get dressed and report for duty, beginning a week that would test everything they had learned about themselves during the previous months of training. From that moment until the following Friday evening, they would be in a state of constant activity with virtually no rest. Sarah entered Hell Week knowing that this would be the ultimate test of her decision to leave her culinary career for military service. Everything she had accomplished up to this point had been preparation for these 5 days, when the instructors would push every candidate beyond what they believed was humanly possible. The physical challenges would be severe, but the mental pressure would be even more intense as sleep deprivation and exhaustion stripped away normal psychological defenses. The first night of Hell Week was a preview of what lay ahead. Candidates were required to complete a series of physical challenges including log races, boat carries, and obstacle courses, all while instructors maintained constant pressure through noise, confusion, and deliberately contradictory orders. By midnight, several candidates had already dropped out of the program, unable to cope with the combination of physical demands and psychological stress. Tuesday brought the surf torture exercise, perhaps the most psychologically challenging event in all of SEAL training. Candidates were required to link arms and sit in the frigid Pacific surf while waves broke over their heads continuously. The water temperature was cold enough to cause hypothermia, and candidates were not allowed to move or speak, while instructors questioned their commitment and suggested that quitting would end their discomfort immediately. Sarah's experience during surf torture became a defining moment in her military career. As the cold penetrated her body and hypothermia began to affect her judgment, she found herself drawing on meditation techniques she had learned during the most stressful periods of her culinary training. Instead of fighting the discomfort, she learned to accept it as temporary and focus her mind on reasons why completing SEAL training was worth any amount of suffering. When several candidates around her began to show signs of serious hypothermia, Sarah took on an unofficial leadership role, quietly encouraging them to maintain their positions and reminding them that the exercise would eventually end. Her calm presence during one of the most psychologically brutal aspects of SEAL training impressed instructors who were watching carefully to identify candidates with genuine leadership potential under extreme stress. Wednesday night brought boat races and log exercises that tested teamwork under conditions of extreme exhaustion. Candidates were organized into boat crews that competed against each other in races that required perfect coordination despite the fact that everyone was operating on virtually no sleep and minimal food. The losing crews faced additional punishment in the form of extra physical exercises, creating intense pressure to perform despite deteriorating physical capabilities. Sarah's boat crew had struggled during earlier competitions, but they found their rhythm during the Wednesday night races. Sarah's experience coordinating kitchen teams during peak service periods proved valuable in organizing her crew's efforts and maintaining morale when they were falling behind. She helped establish communication patterns and timing that allowed her crew to work together effectively even when individual performance was degraded by exhaustion. The final day of Hell Week brought the most complex challenges of all, multi-phase exercises that combined physical exertion with tactical problem-solving while candidates were operating at their absolute limits. These exercises were designed to simulate the kind of real-world conditions where SEALs might be required to perform complex missions after days of continuous operations with minimal rest or resupply. Sarah's performance during these final exercises demonstrated the full range of skills she had developed throughout her unconventional journey to SEAL training. Her ability to think clearly under extreme stress, coordinate team efforts despite exhaustion, and maintain focus on mission objectives even when her body was failing earned recognition from instructors who had watched thousands of candidates attempt these same challenges. When Hell Week officially ended on Friday evening, only 63 candidates remained from the original class of 157. Sarah was among the survivors, but more than that, she had distinguished herself as one of the strongest performers during the most challenging aspects of the week. Her combination of physical capability, mental toughness, and leadership ability had impressed instructors who had initially been skeptical about whether someone from her background could succeed in the program. The second phase of SEAL training focused on combat diving and underwater operations, skills that would be crucial for many of the mission SEALs performed in actual combat. Candidates learned to use sophisticated diving equipment, navigate underwater over long distances, and perform complex tasks while breathing compressed air in challenging conditions. This phase eliminated additional candidates who discovered that they couldn't master the technical and physical demands of underwater operations. Sarah excelled during diving phase, drawing on the water confidence she had developed during her preparation and the attention to detail that characterized everything she approached. The technical aspects of diving equipment maintenance and operation reminded her of the precise equipment work she had done in professional kitchens, while the underwater navigation challenges appealed to her problem-solving abilities. The third and final phase of basic SEAL training covered land warfare tactics, weapons training, and the specific skills that SEALs would need for direct action missions. Candidates learned advanced shooting techniques, small unit tactics, explosive handling, and the complex coordination required for special operations missions. This phase culminated in a final exercise that tested all the skills candidates had developed during the previous months of training. Sarah's performance during land warfare phase was solid across all areas, but she particularly distinguished herself during the leadership exercises where candidates took turns planning and executing simulated combat missions. Her systematic approach to planning, clear communication style, and ability to adapt quickly when situations changed demonstrated that she had developed the tactical judgment necessary for special operations leadership. When the final exercise was completed and all scores were tabulated, Sarah had achieved something that many people had believed was impossible. She had not only survived one of the most demanding military training programs in the world, but had earned the respect of instructors and fellow candidates who had witnessed her performance under the most challenging conditions imaginable. The graduation ceremony for Class 342 was held on a perfect San Diego morning, with families and dignitaries gathered to witness the transformation of 47 surviving candidates into Navy SEALs. As Sarah stood in formation wearing her new uniform, she reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought her from the kitchens of East Los Angeles to this moment of triumph. But even as she celebrated this achievement, Sarah understood that earning the SEAL Trident was just the beginning of a new chapter in her service. The skills and character traits that had carried her through training would now be tested in operational assignments where the stakes would be life and death, not just for herself, but for the teammates who would depend on her leadership and expertise. Master Chief Martinez's final evaluation of Sarah's performance was characteristically understated but profoundly meaningful. She had, he wrote, demonstrated the warrior spirit, tactical competence, and moral courage that defined the best Navy SEALs. Her unconventional background had not been a weakness to overcome, but a source of unique strengths that would serve both her and the team she would join in the years ahead. The story of Sarah Martinez's transformation from chef to Navy SEAL became an inspiration within the military community and beyond, demonstrating that excellence could emerge from the most unexpected backgrounds when talent met opportunity and determination. Her success opened doors for others who might have previously believed that elite military service was beyond their reach, and established new benchmarks for what was possible when people were willing to risk everything in pursuit of their deepest convictions about service and sacrifice. Years later, when Sarah would reflect on her decision to leave the culinary world for military service, she would understand that both careers had been about the same fundamental things: precision under pressure, teamwork in high-stakes environments, and the pursuit of excellence that demanded everything she had to give. The skills were transferable because the underlying character traits were universal, and success in either field required the same willingness to push beyond what seemed possible in service of something greater than individual achievement.